I'm Dane Rose, local San Rafael resident for the past 15 years, and as a concerned citizen and having run a business for 25 years, I've decided to start a nonprofit, and locally my focus is on homelessness in my city. I travel a lot, up to 6 months a year, and found it stunning that in both Copenhagen and in Thailand, I could not see any homeless people. Copenhagen being in some ways a wealthier city than San Rafael, certainly in terms of quality of life. I met 30 residents in Copenhagen and interviewed them, and 100% of the people I interviewed seemed noticeably happier than the average American, which I was surprised with. And particularly because they have 80% taxes. So some of the things that I discovered was 100% of the people I interviewed were employed. 100% had no college debt and had a college degree. I learned that in Denmark, you actually get paid roughly $1,000 a month to go to an excellent college of your choice. I learned that 100% of the people had health insurance that they didn't have to pay for in monthly expenses. I learned there were bicycle lanes. I learned that nobody minded, meaning 100% of the people I talked about were very happy with the 80% tax bracket because they thought they got exceptional value for it. 100% liked their country and their government, something you cannot find anywhere in the United States. And there was also a more relaxed feeling in the people I interviewed, and 100% of them had paid maternity leave. 100% of them worked an average of lower hours than people in the United States. The quality of the architecture, about 300% higher quality than the average architecture, for example, in San Rafael. The quality of the parks, 300% more beautiful, more art than in San Rafael. In short, I expected to find, an angry group of miscontents who were abusing the welfare system because, it's very strong in Denmark, and that's what I hear on the media as the reason we have to cut welfare spending in the United States, is people will abuse the system. And yet with 100% employment, with 100% housing, they liked their jobs. And I started seeing how it fit together, that if everyone has a college education and no student debt, if they study the subjects that are important to them, if they're not pressured into work because there are good benefits when you're unemployed, what actually ends up happening in Denmark is that people take time to find a boss and to find a segment in the workplace that they are competent at, educated for, and enjoy doing. And they do very well in that job, which results in a statistic in Scandinavia in which there are more billionaires per capita, meaning the whole message is, we need to be rich and encourage the free market, so we've got to cut taxes in the United States to encourage people to get rich and not punish people for having money. But even with these 80% taxes, more billionaires per capita. So you get an entire country that is housed. You get an entire country with no student debt, an entire country with excellent health care, with that are college educated in subjects they like, and they work harder and smarter because they're competent. In other words, Denmark is a more intelligent country. And the Danish people know more about the United States, for example, than the United States. You and I didn't know anything about Denmark before I went there. And Copenhagen is a more intelligent city than the city of San Rafael. Now, I've studied success experts since my teens, because all the data says if you want to do something well, you've got to learn from someone who knows more about that than you do. And so, if I wanted to achieve goals, I had to study people who were very good at achieving their goals. If I wanted to start a business, I needed to study people who were very good at starting many businesses successfully. And it follows that if you want to have a better city, certainly better than average, that you want to study cities that do a better job than you do. This is, of course, not always an American attitude. There's paid maternity leave in Denmark for both parents. But this doesn't stop politicians in the United States from talking in the abstract about being number one, but not clarifying things like, are we number one in obesity, or are we number one in caring for our people? Are we number one in creating traumatic incidents for our children, or are we number one in providing safe, secure maternity leave? Because this is a sustainable practice. The Danish people spend more time with their family. The crime rates are lower. Children are safer, less childhood trauma. It is a stunning statistic. And what I'd like to see is that our city's tax money be spent with at least the goal of creating similar results. Copenhagen is not smaller than the the city of San Rafael. I don't think Americans are born dumber than the average person in Copenhagen. And so what does it get down to? Government policies, local and cultural values. And to some extent, I think if we had been born in Copenhagen, we would find their way quite natural. As I say, 100% of the people I interviewed, randomly in parks, on buses, and restaurants, and the street. First of all, they had more time. They weren't as busy and hectic as us because they work lower work weeks, but also they're not trying to get by. That's covered. They've already gotten by. What they're trying to do is, focus on meaningful goals and subjects in their lives. And their well-being and happiness and being courteous to a visitor is one of them, which is why they all had time to interview me. Something that in San Rafael, many people are too busy. So that's on the Copenhagen side. Now, what's interesting is I have an apartment in Thailand that costs me $150 a month. Now, what does that include? It includes higher speed internet than I get in San Rafael. Comcast can't keep up with Thailand. It includes air conditioning. It includes neighbors, meaning I live on Bungalow Avenue. I've invited various neighbors to connect. They're too busy, and some of them seem puzzled at why I would be knocking on the door to say, hello, I'm a neighbor. Some of them are hostile. Not so in Thailand. Again, a metric of health. The first time I moved into my apartment, many of the other neighbors were eating out in a common space, a healthy cultural activity that facilitates integration, sharing food together in a potluck for the neighborhood, meaning just routine healthy culture in Thailand. And I was invited to join, and even without speaking Thai, I felt more at home on the first day than in 15 years in my own neighborhood. And I have to wonder, Copenhagen, Thailand, a wealthier city in many ways, Copenhagen, a lot of that wealth plowed into social welfare. But in Thailand, the average income is $300 a month. And again, a generosity of spirit and a sense of inclusion, a spaciousness. The Thai had more time for me than my own neighbors. And of course, in my neighborhood, like in general in San Rafael, the average home is $1 million. And this grates on me because it tells me it has nothing to do with money. $300 a month, $20,000 a month. I'll often net $20,000, $30,000 a month in my business here, which is more than I need. But it's the quality of life that I'm interested in. And again, will we learn anything from Thailand? Because when I am in my apartment at $150 a month, I feel more abundant than I do in a much bigger house in my neighborhood in San Rafael. And I would like to challenge us as a city to be intelligent, meaning if there are cities around the world, and these are just two, which are both happier, for example, Denmark rates significantly happier than the average U.S. citizen, and I'm sure that ties in with our city as well. And I'm happier when I'm in Copenhagen, and I'm happier in Thailand. 2 points on the wealth continuum. Could we actually focus, for example, in our city on, for example, Bhutan has a metric of happiness. And that's a country focusing on the happiness of its people rather than just how much natural resources are turned into things. And I think that's a healthy metric because in an ecological period where Western cultures in particular are generating more garbage and waste per person than any other person in the history of the planet, meaning you and I in San Rafael are statistically going to create 100 tons of stuff that we don't know what to do with in this culture, called garbage. Meaning we're going to cut down trees and dig up oil and do this and do this, and then we're going to throw 100 tons of that away in a hole or we're going to burn it. That's what's happening here in our city. And in talking with a few local politicians and talking with the San Rafael dump, incredible disinterest in reducing this amount. And in fact, the San Rafael dump, the manager, Fred, there, did not want me to film how much was being thrown away of great stuff. And I already knew that because as a contractor, if I've got great stuff that, leftover 2x4s, this, that, and the other, I have no place to put it to recycle it. There's no place in my city that says, hey, you got decent stuff that someone might want, put it here for free and other people can pick it up for free and we'll take it out of the waste stream. Now, intelligence is the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into human well-being. Meaning, if you are throwing away a useful form of energy, and then someone else is buying that and trucking it in again, and this is being hauled away, that is not intelligent because it's inefficient. And so the intelligence of the culture is determined in part by whether something like that is allowed for. Meaning if you can do video of more than 100,000 tons of useful stuff going to the dump every year and then being carting off somewhere, as other people buy those same things a few weeks later, you have to say that we have an unintelligent waste system that is adding not only to this 100-ton per person in a lifetime waste figure, but it's also adding to our cost. And all of those 100 tons came from natural resources. Meaning we don't have other planets that we pull in this 100 tons from. Every bit of that 100 tons was a useful form of the ecology. If it was paper, it used to be trees. If it was wood, it used to be trees. If it was plastics, it used to be oil that could have been put into the fuel stream. So all of that 100 tons came from a useful form of nature, and then we've turned it into something that we don't know what to do with and throw it in a hole. Adding to our finance costs, the cost of throwing things away, the dump cost, the cost of burying them in holes, and the ecological cost. And what disturbs me as a citizen is the complete lack of interest, meaning there's no politician or the dump. In fact, as I say, Fred, the manager there, was angry that I was filmed and would not give me permission. It's like, what's to hide? You don't want to see what we're throwing away in our own culture? I mean, is this some big secret? It's very, very odd. And it's very American. It's certainly very San Rafael. That is what's going on in our city. So there's no homelessness in Thailand. And one of the reasons is that it's a more family-centric culture. It's really beautiful the way the Thai take care of themselves and each other. Again, with, if I make $100,000 a year because I take 6 months off work, and they make, $10,000 a year, they have more time for family than we do. I can't get my brother on the phone for an easy afternoon call. The Thai have time for their people, and they don't have homeless. And the primary reason they don't have homeless is that their local and federal governments do not impose restrictions on any individual constructing a basic house. Now, a basic house is 1 story high and big enough to provide safe, dry shelter for anyone that needs safe, dry shelter. It's not complicated. Hammer together some 2x4s, weave together some bamboo, put on a tin roof, provide as much insulation as is needed, add a door, add windows, bingo. You have safe, dry, legal housing for $3 a square foot, a couple $100 later, a month's salary, you've got a little structure. So no one is out in the rain. No one is unwelcome. No one is sleeping in their cars. Why would they? No one is sleeping in the park. Why would they? And another relative needs a home, comes on. Well, you just put a little structure right next to the first one or add a room. What's interesting is that 500 years ago in this country, our Native Americans were doing the same thing. Nobody said it was illegal to stick up a teepee. They all had safe, legal, dry sleeping areas. It's not until our invasion in this country, and more importantly, the last 100 years of housing regulation, that we have created millions of American homeless. and thousands of San Rafael homeless. We have created homelessness by first empowering government to regulate housing. Is that a good idea? You see, in Thailand, they don't get subsidies, meaning the reason that there isn't any homelessness, I can't go anywhere around and see homeless people in Thailand. I've traveled the whole country. Why? Well, it's not that they get handouts. There is not a single housing program in Thailand. Taxes are lower than they are in San Rafael. So we have two opposite approaches is what I'm getting at. So there's almost no taxes in Thailand, and there's no government handouts. So the government doesn't provide you a house. They don't provide housing services. They don't provide buildings in which housing service, employees meet to figure out the housing problem at public expense. No, they just don't get into it. They don't get into it unless you're building a hotel or a business or a large structure that needs engineering. A single-story structure with a tin roof, etc. It's such a simple thing to build. They build it themselves. You don't need a builder to just put up a 150 square foot sleeping area. Why would you? When you've watched your parents do that, your relatives do that. In other words, the Thai are more independent in this area. They're more free. They're more independent. They're more housed. They're lower taxed. They take better care of their family. They're naturally happier because their trauma levels are lower, so it's naturally nicer to be around them. That's a nice group of people to be with. And care for the people is ingrained in that. Now, I think the intelligence of leadership, in part, if you want to lead, first of all, you should lead from the position that you can help the people you are leading more than if you didn't exist, or more than the other people that want to lead. So whether it's being a mayor or being a president, if you say, hey, I want to lead this city, you should be able to take the city in a direction that lowers its costs and improves its well-being, or that increases its costs but increases its well-being more than it increases the cost, so that you get a good return on that investment. If you can't do that, then leading is a selfish act. I want to lead you into more misery than you were before is not an ethical position, particularly when using public money. Now, a leader's primary responsibility, be that a government or a person in government or a leader on a mountain expedition, is a leader who can provide well-being for the people being led. Otherwise, it's a dictatorial framework or a scam. It's like, I'm going to lead you in this way that's good for my business and good for my ego, etc., but doesn't help you. It's not very a compelling leadership message. So anyway, when I started my nonprofit, which I self-fund, meaning I haven't raised any money, it's not very pleasant to try and raise money. There's lots of people needing money, and so I just fund it, and I try and spend that intelligently. I thought I'd start with the idea of, let's look at the data and say that we're the 5th wealthiest county in the United States. The San Rafael government has more tax money per capita than more than 90% of the countries and cities in the world. Meaning, so we are gathering more taxes per person in dollars in San Rafael than the vast majority of cities anywhere in the world and anywhere in history. It's a big budget per person. And the question is, could we have as a mandate in our city a standard that is as good as Thailand's with $300 and almost no taxes? And then how do you prioritize that? Well, Abraham Maslow established a framework of human needs that he observed in cultures around the world. And it basically goes like this, that every human being needs to survive. And that means a warm, dry place to sleep, nourishing food, fresh baked bread and a bowl of soup. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated, but nourishing food. Freedom of movement, health, you're not in a health crisis, and the opportunity to develop and create meaningful relationships. So safety, security, not being raped, not being stolen from. Interestingly, the crime rate very low in Thailand, very low in Copenhagen, and so these are the basic human needs. And 500 years ago, every Native American had a safe, legal, dry place to sleep with no mortgage. They had a sense of belonging to their tribe more than many of us have with our neighbors. It's an alarming statistic. It turns out that more than 70% of Americans feel chronically lonely, meaning regular periods of loneliness. And you have to wonder, well, did the Native Americans, eating together by the fire, participating in tribes, being in nature, not high pollution, they didn't have to commute, did they feel lonely like we do? The isolation. Many Americans do not have a single friend as a confidant. Again, well below Copenhagen, well below Thailand. Is that what a kind leader takes you towards? And it's interestingly that the GDP per capita is going up, meaning the amount of natural resources being turned into things and purchased in the United States is going up. The happiness, the amount of friendship, the amount of homelessness, these are not going in a good direction. Just the amount at which we take bits of nature and turn them into garbage, that amount goes up. The consumption rate, the efficiency of working. But unlike Thailand or Denmark, where work satisfaction is very high, so you're spending 10 hours a day working, at least hopefully you enjoy doing what you are doing 10 hours a day. In the United States, it's below both of those countries, which is kind of sad because we work more than those countries, but we don't like our jobs as much. Not very intelligent. So I'd like to see in our city, think global, start local, actual respect for the accomplishments of other cities around the world at creating well-being for their people. One of the single most alarming things that I see in my city is zero low-cost housing. Meaning even homeward bound, the homeward shelter that builds a few units a year, that's, with millions of dollars in budget, they build a few units a year, maybe 6, maybe 9, a few. They can't build a unit for less than $600,000. That's a low-cost unit here. And of course, no homeless person can afford a low-cost $600,000 unit. But what's interesting to me is when I've interviewed our homeless, and I ask them, do you have any money? Yes. They all have some money that I've talked to. Okay, how much could you spend on rent a month? The answer I get is between $300 and $900 a month. That's what our homeless in our city tell me. They have $300 to $900 a month that they would spend on housing. Now, I don't know if you think that Americans are inherently dumber than Thai people. There's there are Thai people with addiction problems. There are people in Copenhagen with addiction problems. There are Thai, I didn't meet anyone who wasn't college educated in Copenhagen, but almost no one is college educated in Thailand. But they all have housing. And so one has to ask the question, do you think there are any Americans that, if given the choice to live under a bridge or to live in a little constructed house, would prefer to live under a bridge or in their car to living in a little house? And also, is there anyone, if houses were free or $300 a month, would they prefer to be homeless as opposed to have a home? And, if you haven't guessed it, the data is overwhelming. Every single San Rafael resident, if they had access to a free or a $300 a month shelter, would be in that. And healthy and ethical governments around the world provide that free or low-cost housing. The Thais just don't get in the way of their own people. And this also is an interesting paradox, because I was raised in the land of the free and the land of the brave. I'm way freer in Thailand, as are the Thai people. I'm actually able to walk in the parks in Thailand at 2 a.m. in the morning. Why? Because the Thai government doesn't hire park rangers to block the Thai people out of their own parks. Amazing. So they save money by giving more access to public land. Saving money, more access to public land, win-win. More Thai people use the parks 24/7. More money is saved 24/7. I'm regularly shepherded out at the nicest time of day, meaning Americans get off work in the evening, often late. So by the time a typical San Rafael resident is driving home from work, their parks have already been closed up. You go out to China Camp, the gates are closed. You're having a picnic, the ranger comes along and says, move your car out of here. The typical Thai person, because they don't have these rangers, don't have to pay for their parks. They're just there, public land. We do. So there's a lot of areas we could learn. And the question is, do we want to? Now, I have not gotten a single response from the mayor of San Rafael. So I'm writing to all of you. And I measure the intelligence and responsiveness of a government by its interest in dialogue and caring for its people. Now, I've written to 5 people in my government as part of trying to help with the homelessness issue. The city attorney did not return his email. The mayor has not returned multiple emails. There's another fellow that's, I think he's second to the mayor. I wrote to him. He didn't return his email. Then there was the fellow who wrote a survey. He asked me to fill out a survey about the city. And I replied to that email, and I said, can you tell me the cost of this survey? He didn't reply either. So at the one hand, he's giving a question to me. He says, will you fill out a bunch of questions for me? And I'm asking, will you answer one question for me? He doesn't want to talk. It's a little bit of a mixed message. Do you think that people want to talk to you if they refuse to talk to you? And then you think, well, do you think people can govern if they're not interested in dialogue? Now, Andrew Henning is the one person who will talk, before at least, to me about some of the homeless issue. And I'm reaching out to you because I want to see what the pattern is. And I started off making a documentary about homelessness in my city. homelessness in Marin County and specifically in San Rafael. And it's becoming a documentary about local San Rafael government. This is the city that I live. Traveling as much as I do, it's incredibly clear that there are hundreds of good ways of governing, and there are hundreds of bad ways of governing. And, like most Americans, I've been far too busy running my company to actually know what's going on at a governmental level in my city until now. And I'm trying to find out so that I can bring this to focus, because most Americans are not going to be able to travel 6 months of the year and learn just how odd we are in some ways, as well as to see where we're beneficial. I mean, when you do a scatter pattern on multiple government systems around the world, you see that we're good at some things, we're okay at others, and we're terrible at others. And what intelligence and ethics requires is that if we are going to seize people's property, it's very important to understand this ethical framework, that as a city employee, following city law in a framework of seizure and imprisonment for not paying taxes, meaning that's the threat that we in America have set up with our people, that we want to help you in government. We want to help you. It's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We want to help you, but we need your money and we need your authority to do so. Will you give us your money and authority? And we vote laws that give local government money and authority. But the whole principle of democracy is that this is to help you. This is not the attitude of many government employees and officials, though. Their attitude is, this is my job and I'm not getting paid enough. It's not that it's your money. And if we're going to take it by force, this is a monopoly, in other words. Government is a monopoly with a monopoly on force. Meaning if you as a city employee don't do what I want, and I stick you up at gunpoint or put you in a concrete box because you didn't do what I want, that's called, a criminal offense, and I'm to be hunted down. But if a city employee says, this bit of paper says I can do this, and you've got to pay me, $1,000 a month in property taxes, and I say, I don't want to pay you $1,000 a month in property taxes. I've got something more intelligent to do with that money. I'd like to make my homeless documentary. I'd like to do this instead. You say, well, I don't care. I'm going to take your money, or I'm going to sell your house. So it's seizure with an underlying monopoly on force. That's why the city can get 100% of people to give up lots of money. For example, if I buy a Tesla, which I've been looking into, and one of the tipping points why I'm not buying a Tesla right now is San Rafael and the state wants to add $5,000 in taxes. It's like, I don't want to pay an extra $5,000 for making my city greener. I've got a gas guzzler. Every neighbor has to listen to me driving. Every neighbor has to smell the fumes. It's not as good for the environment. And it's expensive enough to buy an EV as it is. It's a big chunk. So if I do that for my city, why am I paying an extra $5,000? Do I like that policy? Does it encourage more electric vehicles in San Rafael? Would we all like that? There's a lot of things I don't like about local policy and taxation. I will pay more in property taxes than it costs to build a house in Thailand. I don't like that either. But I don't have a choice. And what this creates is an ethical framework in which it's imperative, if you want to have a low violence, low bitterness culture, that if you seize people's possessions, their time, their money, their things, with a mandate of law and a monopoly on power, it is essential that people see that you are doing that to help them. Meaning nobody signed in any of these laws promising to hurt the people with their own money. Give us your money, give us your trust, give us your vote, and we will fuck you up, because that's what we're about. Vote here. Nobody said that. Every single law on the books, every single bit of money in government coffers was taken under the promise of helping the people. Now, you and I know how irritating it would be to be able to have your government say you have to buy shoes from us. And you could go on Amazon and see that they were $39.99, but your local government was selling the same shoes for $200 with a law that you'd have to buy the shoes from the local government. It'd be infuriating. We're mad enough when Amazon charges 30% more than the same item at Walmart or something like this. And the same is true when you have monopolies on services like building permits. So you have some countries where you don't even have to have them. 100 years ago, you didn't have to have them in America. And it wasn't like the average person's house fell down. The average person's house was thousands of percent cheaper than the average house today. Now, it's also a visceral reality that if there's a stray dog, I know where to call. If someone is walking on a piece of wetland grass that they shouldn't be, I have a place to call. But if a human being is sick, lonely, has nowhere to legally sleep, there is no place to call. That is a betrayal of the most basic human needs. And it's not a question of money. In fact, if, as a contractor, I hear the horror stories of bizarre efforts by San Rafael government to permit and drive up the cost of even the most basic structures to more money than it costs to build a house in Thailand. The permits can take more time to get than it would take to build the structure. Now, one of the key focuses that I have is a belief that a city cannot be healthy at its core unless it has a continuum of housing that corresponds with people's ability to pay. Now, why do I believe that? Well, first of all, we have an outbreak of hepatitis amongst the homeless in Southern California right now that will spread to the rest of the population. Secondly, it crushes the entrepreneurial spirit when you're doing a risky new venture to have such high rents that the business is likely to fold under debt pressure before it has a chance to take off. We're actually living in a culture that is riding on the cream of Silicon Valley. But remember where Apple was started. It was out of a garage. Well, what if that garage had been shut down by the city of San Rafael as you don't have a work permit to build computers in this garage? What if if Jobs was living in an adapted garage, for low rent, and the city had shut him down? Well, Apple wouldn't exist if Jobs had been forced to get a real job and was paying, $2,000 or $3,000 a month. You could not start an enterprise with the kind of high rents that we have today in our area the way we could 30, 40 years ago. Relatively speaking, there was There was a lower risk environment when rents are lower. Now, one of the questions I have for any of you at the city is, do any of you know a single policy that has lowered the cost of getting a permit in San Rafael or lowered the cost of constructing low-cost housing of any form in San Rafael over the last 40 years? Meaning, has the city done a single thing with public trust and public money that lowers the cost of housing, that makes it faster and cheaper and easier to get a permit and to construct a low-cost shelter? Because as a contractor, what I see every single year that I'm in business is that my tax money is taken to hire local officials who figure out ways to add more expense and more hassle to construction at every single level of the project. I have never met in multiple cities, I have never met in San Rafael, a single official or received a single email or a single notification that said, we have lowered the cost of constructing something in this city. Now, if most people would agree that $600,000 a unit is not low cost, and if everyone with even a little bit of accounting skill can say that someone who has $300 a month, who would have a home built for that amount in Thailand, is never going to afford a $600,000 unit, then who is it that is creating the housing crisis? Is it local housing officials and policies? Or is it the people who cannot find any safe legal place to sleep for $300 a month? Period. A garden shed, a tent, it's precluded by law. This is the single biggest ethical challenge I have for my city, is that my city has taken my tax dollars to invent a system and vote on a system and implement a system that is not only expensive in tax dollars, but is expensive in city dollars, and that results in zero low-cost housing. Now, low-cost housing has got to be defined by the people who need to be housed. Well, I've already done that data. It's $300 to $900 a month. That's not low for them. That's all they can afford. So we could ship people off to Thailand where they would instantly be housed because they wouldn't be interfered with. We could ship people off to Denmark where they'd be a little bit of a loss because they wouldn't be college educated and all of that. Or we can actually provide some frameworks for our own people to legally sleep like our Native Americans, in a teepee, in a tent, in a van, in a little cottage that they can afford. Now, my question is, how do we get to this level of cruelty where we have some of the highest tax rates per person, but we simultaneously have more homeless people in my city, in our city, than in Thailand or Copenhagen? And I think there are a couple of things behind this, but one of them is this attitude that through a monopoly on force and law, that our city is taking some of the highest taxes per person in any city in the world. One. But in which the public servants hired by the public to help the public do not feel any moral, ethical courtesy requirement to respond to emails by the public about how the public money is being spent. And my question to you, I obviously know the mayor's opinion because he would respond to email with multiple requests if he felt it was important to dialogue with the people whose money he's directing. Now, Andrew Henning, for example, will not tell me what his salary is. Is that appropriate? Meaning, do you believe, as a city employee, do you believe that any use of public money should be secret? Because that's one of the reasons, as a subcategory in my documentary, I'm doing a section on San Rafael, City of Secrets. Now, if I, as a tax-paying resident, cannot find out the salary of the people my money is hiring to help the people, for the people, by the people, of the people, how is that consistent with whether it's our sense of democracy or our sense of participation? Meaning, if government employees don't want to email to the public about things interesting to the public. Now, I understand that city officials send out terse emails, reply to this immediately, this is a city concern, or you will be fined this amount. I get those emails from time to time. I'm not adding the fine, responding to this email to this and this and this, or you will each pay $300 or whatever, or be towed or whatever. No, just a response. So this is not a big issue in and of itself. It's not a huge issue what Andrew Henning's salary is, but it's part of a larger picture, meaning there is no one from the mayor to the city and to what I understand the council, because Andrew told me that a council member told him not to talk to me and maybe told him not to tell him who the council is. You see, how can you have a democracy based on secrecy? And this, we look at this in Washington, but it starts locally. Do we want a transparent government? What is transparency? As a public nonprofit, tax returns and expenses, etc., have to be public. I would like anyone in the city who wants to, anyone, junior clerk, a janitor, to tell me what the budget for the last 12 months homeless projects were. Meaning, how much did this city spend on homelessness? And how was each dollar spent? Including Andrew Henning's salary, and what was achieved for that goal. Now, as I say, the Thai don't have homeless because their government doesn't get in the way. We do spend millions of dollars on homelessness in Marin County and millions of dollars in San Rafael. And we have more homeless than in Thailand. I'm interested in why. Why is it that we're spending millions of dollars in government money to see homelessness rise, and in Thailand, no government money, and there is no homeless to begin with? You cannot do an analysis without data. The biggest defense of an unintelligent system is to hide the data. If nobody will tell you what the facts are, how can you examine if they are intelligent facts? So I'm relating to this as a media, meaning media is simply people that report things for the public. I'm making a local documentary for consumption in San Rafael. Is this a city of secrets? Is this a city that would take a stand to say we would like to take your money, and if you don't pay us, we'll throw you in jail, and we don't want to tell you how we're spending it, and we don't want to talk to you, and we want to sustain a policy in which we do not do a single thing to create housing at the 300 to 900 that our people need, by giving people the right to sleep in tents in people's gardens or little cottages, or provide, it doesn't matter how it is. People do not need mansions. People do not need, 600 square feet. They need a safe, dry, legal, meaning police protected. I met with one young woman who was gang raped because she was hiding her car from the police because she knows that in San Rafael, the police hunt her if she sleeps in her car. So this poor young woman, gang raped, hiding from the police. That's the consequence of spending public money to make it illegal to sleep in your car. Is that good for, is that an abuse of public funds when, let's say, people move out of their car into the cold and then get sick, and then the public has to pay their ER bill because no one in the city thought that out before passing that law? People are not going to shoot themselves because they get out of their car. They're going to sleep outdoors rather than in their car. Or they're going to, as this young woman did, hide the car from the police in a low-light, low-traffic area and then be gang raped because the gang finds a young woman alone in her car hiding from the police. Is that what we want in an ethical city? And the reason I bring in Thailand and Denmark is simply because we're so myopic in our country that it never seems to occur to us that people have figured this out in other cities, but our government officials do not seem to want to learn from me or other governments directly. I don't care how we learn it. I just care about the fact that there are people dying at a rate of 4 hours a day in our city who feel ashamed, unwanted, ignored, and have no safe legal shelter in one of the wealthiest counties in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And if you can help me with a story, with a document, with anything that will help that turn around, I believe it is the moral and ethical thing to do. I'm not going to make a dime off of any of this. I take time off of work to then fund this project with work. I don't take anyone's money under threat of seizure. And I know this problem can be easily solved because I've seen it solved. Not in the United States, but in poorer and wealthier countries, just with a shift in attitude and policy. Now, I would like to see a city where ideas are invited and voted upon with narrative. That's the single biggest thing I'd like to see in San Rafael. I would like any member of the public to be able to submit an idea and have it publicly viewed on a website. And I would like the city to invite public comment on any idea on a website and vote on the ideas. And I would like city policy to either follow the public and actually represent them, or debate the idea on a cost-benefit analysis in long enough form that we can understand the rationale. And I would like to see a plan for eliminating homelessness that has dates, goals, and a budget that shows how that will be done. And with that, a plan that allows I don't want a dime of public money. What I want is a framework of law where anyone can go from being on the street, sleeping illegally, to having a safe, dry, legal place that they can construct on their own. Could be in a parking lot, could be a designated area, I don't care. But the medical costs alone that we, the taxpayers, have to pay, from ER visits, from people catching pneumonia, catching various diseases, high stress, not completing their antibiotics because they're busy trying to find a place to hide. The medical costs alone are higher than the cost to give someone a place to sleep. And these people are not asking for a free house. They're asking for a space in which the police will leave them alone and protect them if they're attacked, like any other citizen, to sleep in, can be 10 by 10, a dry tent that the police patrols to protect them rather than comes by and seizes to take their things. It's a completely different attitude. One is a barbaric city in which if you don't have enough money to buy a $600,000 house, you will be hunted using your own tax money. And the other is a humane approach where people are allowed the right to pursue happiness, which is the right to meet their human needs for safe legal shelter. I would encourage you to have our mayor and council respond, to host a meeting where the public can share ideas and have questions answered. That's at least 5 hours long because these are in-depth questions. And I would generally close with an awareness that if you seize people's money with a monopoly on force, you have a much higher ethical and moral responsibility to spend that money in their interest. And just as if I, as a contractor, had a monopoly, meaning if you wanted to do some contracting, you had to hire me. And because I knew you had to hire me, I didn't return your emails. And I charged 3 times over market price, such that it took 3 times longer to build your house, 3 times over market rate. I didn't respond to communication, and I stole. You said you didn't want to hire me, but I took it anyway. That would not leave a good feeling. And this is the situation in some areas of local city government. The more you have the right by law to have a monopoly and seize people's money if they don't do what you want or if they don't pay X in taxes, the more critical it is to show compassion and responsiveness for the people in the care of the city, meaning anyone in this city, particularly the people who have been residents here before, have a reasonable right, whether it's because we consider ourselves a Christian culture and caring for the poor, or whether it's because we actually understand money and we understand that it's more expensive to treat the diseases of the homeless than it is to give them a house, and we call ourselves intelligent, and we have that data, or whether it's because we want to encourage the entrepreneurial spirit and actually create low-cost housing, or whether we believe in our tradition of freedom and happiness, and so we make a commitment to see that every American has the freedom to sleep safely and legally with police protection. Doesn't matter which angle you look at it from. The current status quo is that the monopoly on power is being exploited to continually drive housing costs up, leaving a minority faction that will never be able to afford that 600,000 plus house, which is creating homelessness under government rule, by government. So thank you for your time. And what I will be doing is, first of all, inviting dialogue from any of you in the city that want to be either interviewed or send me documents, etc. Anything that you can send me that would help, by all means, and anything you want to know about this, meaning I'm researching this specifically with the goal of ending homelessness in my city. If you want to know something and want help researching, let me know. If you want to get input on ideas, let me know. If you want to block the public out entirely, just do that. But I will be reporting this because part of a democracy that what helps unlock this attitude in government of we have the right to do whatever we want with your money and not tell you what it is, and it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. It's not my money, so we can waste it. The counter pressure of that is a free media. Now, it's not a free media when you have a media blockade, and it's not healthy for anyone. You, me, the neighbors, the homeless, everyone suffers when ideas don't get debated and when information is not public. Now, my understanding is that Andrew Henning and the mayor and the city attorney is okay with not disclosing aspects of the budget. I think that's a big mistake, and I'd like to hear what you think. Thank you.